Yeah, so once again, good morning, students. Let us resume our discussion on the film Battleship Potemkin and the contribution of the Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein to films. We are discussing his immortal film Battleship Potemkin. We were talking about the Soviet film industry and the film school that was set up by soon after the Bolshevik Revolution and the coming into power of Lenin and the Communist Party, because of the way in which they realized the import or the significance of films to be able to reach out to the masses. The kind of public appeal that films had was something that they rightly realized no other medium had. So in order to appeal to the common people, in order to communicate to the largely illiterate, diverse communities spread across the length and breadth of the large country of the Soviet Union, you have them depending on the medium of films. And that is how people like Sergei Eisenstein come into the limelight. They received a great deal of encouragement and promotion from the government to make their films and to educate the people about the revolution and the glory of revolution. We talked about agitprop, we talked about the combination of agitation and propaganda, or how the films were made used to propagate the glories of agitation or revolution. We talked about the role played by Kuleshov in this school and how they made do with whatever was available. They got a few slides of film from here and there, and they made use of this image from D.W. Griffith's film Intolerance, this particular shot, in order to prove how you can achieve wonders through editing, in the way that a particular shot is placed beside other shots. You can communicate, you can convey the desired meaning, and that is what is known as the Kuleshov effect. And among the eminent students who attended the school and who came directly under the mentorship of Kuleshov was Sergei Eisenstein. Of course, he was not alone, there were others too. Potemkin is another eminent contemporary of his who has also made use of pretty much the same techniques, but Eisenstein has, a position all his own. There were others too, like Vertov, the man who made the movie with the man with the movie camera. That's again a very significant early movie. But we will focus our attention on Eisenstein, who was, as I told you, who was trained as an engineer, but who had, very powerful ideas about the theory of editing. He was an intellectual who formulated a modernist theory of editing based on the psychology and perception of the Marxist dialectic. He was very much influenced by Marxist thinking, and he adapted that to film engineering and used it to, use the dialectical theory of the conflict between the opposing classes. That theory was put into practice in the way he added slides or shots together to communicate ideas. So he studied under Kuleshov and was inspired to write his first theoretical manifesto, The Montage of Attractions. He has contributed many more important essays, The Film Sense, The Film Movement, Montage, and so on. One of the essays of which we will be soon discussing, the essay called Word and Image from the Work, The Film Sense. So he's not just a filmmaker, he's not somebody who he's not just somebody who revolutionized the montage theory of editing, theory and practice of editing, but he has also contributed as a theoretician, as a writer, a film theorist. So this article, The Montage of Attractions, was one that promoted, assaulting or attacking or bombarding the audience with images one after the other with a calculated effect of causing emotional shock on them, to rouse them into realization about the importance of agitation. So we'll see in this movie we have some instances of that. So he believed that rapid and jolting juxtaposition, placing side by side of images, was the best way to manipulate. Yes. Yes. Was the best way. And why do you ask? I'm doing screen recording.
Okay.
ഈ ഗൂഗിൾ മീറ്റിൽ റെക്കോർഡിംഗ് ഇല്ല എന്നറിയില്ലേ? ഗൂഗിൾ ഡ്രൈവിലേ ഉള്ളൂ റെക്കോർഡിംഗ്, ഗൂഗിൾ ജി സ്വീറ്റിലേ ഉള്ളൂ. ഐ എം യൂസിങ് ഗൂഗിൾ മീറ്റ്. So he believed that the rapid and jolting juxtaposition of images was the best way to manipulate the emotional response of an audience. And they, in general at that time, following the impact of Kuleshov and this school, there was this the editing technique was something that was very much in the forefront in the making of films, and one feature that differentiates Russian films from the Hollywood films that were made on the other side of the globe at the same time is in the the large number of images. These films actually feature many more shots than the Hollywood films that were made around the same time. And while the Hollywood movies moved in a kind of seamless manner, that was the kind of editing technique that they practiced, here you have this jolting effect, one shot quickly interspersed with another, which probably did not have anything to do with the earlier scene. So disparate images, it's like the metaphysical wit about which we have learned in the context of Donne's poetry. We've seen how heterogeneous ideas were often yoked together in a very violent manner. It was precisely in the same manner. It was a very modernist technique, the avant-garde, make it new kind of modernist technique that Eisenstein perfected by Eisenstein and the others of the Russian film industry perfected by putting these disparate heterogeneous shots together, shots which did not have anything to do with each other, but when placed together conveyed a third meaning, exactly what they wanted to convey. And they also, unlike Hollywood, which had by that time developed the cult of the actors, here you have largely untrained actors, and instead of a single individual, the heroic figure, you do not have that kind of a heroic figure in many of these Russian movies. You have the crowd as the hero. You can see that contrast between European or American novels in general and Russian novels. We say that War and Peace, one of the classics of Russian literature, it does not have a protagonist, unlike any of the novels of the American context, where you have the image of the hero, the protagonist who looms large. It is always built around the image of that protagonist who's a pioneer, who goes in search of meaning and so on. Whereas Russian films largely stay away from this image of the single hero, and you have these, in these movies too, more than the individual, the crowd sequences. We will learn about the contributions of Eisenstein. Just to introduce you to the kind of position he has in the history of films. As I told you, you cannot study film, you cannot enter film studies without paying tribute to the role played by Eisenstein as one of the early filmmakers and film theoreticians. He is known as the father of montage. He developed and perfected this film technique of editing, a fast-paced sequence of short shots, very brief, short, instant shots, which transcend time and suggest a kind of thematic juxtaposition. What you have on the right side of the slide is, can you guess what that is? What does it look like?
Google അല്ലേ ma'am?
Yeah, it is a,
Google.
exactly. It is a doodle, Google Doodle. We've seen how Google always celebrates important occasions with its doodles, for that specific day. And on the 22nd of January, when he was born, that is his birthday. I think this was on the occasion of his 120th birth anniversary a few years back that Google came up with this. It was an interactive thing actually. You could, I've just used the image here, but you can, I'm sure it's available in Google Images. When you click on it, you will see the multimedia effect of it and the way he used these images, his characteristic art of cutting together these celluloid images and placing them together in very strange combinations. That I'm reminded of that scene in Midnight's Children, which I guess probably you have studied. Through the perforation, they look at different combinations. In Gunther Grass's The Tin Drum, again you have this kind of a novel, many photographs being put together to create different kinds of images. Anyway, his films were also, so on the one side, he developed and perfected this art of montage. Secondly, he's also a person who's, again, someone else is trying to come in. Aisha Shahda? Aisha, the commerce class is over, okay? This is another class. You can leave the meet. Yeah, so the way his movies depicted the revolution, depicted the struggles of the common people, the downtrodden, the farmers, the peasants, and the common man against the ruling class. So that political significance is also something that Eisenstein is today remembered for. And as I told you, he was somebody who was commissioned by the government to make films which formed part of this agitprop. And it was in that context that he was invited to direct the Proletkult sponsored. Proletkult was as a government sponsored organization. It was like an institute that was instituted in order to promote art and culture that celebrated the revolution. And he made this movie Strike as per their recommendations in the year 1924, and it was in the course of this film's production that he became associated with a cinematographer named Edward Tissé. He's a very important figure when we look at Eisenstein's repertoire. Eisenstein would be incomplete without the cinematographic images provided by the camera of Edward Tissé. It was a kind of lifelong partnership. In the history of films, even today, you have this kind of very strong bond, that you have between certain filmmakers and their cinematographers. Satyajit Ray had, without the bond that they shared was one that went to go into the making of the film, and that is brought to a classic level in the case of Eisenstein and Tissé. So they began in this Goskino studio where they made their movies, this lifelong artistic collaboration of Sergei Eisenstein and Edward Tissé is to be spoken about. So this movie is a kind of semi-documentary film which represented the brutal suppression of a strike by in a factory, but the factory owners had risen in rebellion against the Tsar's army, and this is being conveyed from the point of view of the laborers. So it was a very powerful film which naturally won the approval of the masses. And in that movie you can find this perfection of the montage theory. It was also the first revolutionary mass film of the new Soviet state, a movie that tells a story not of an individual but of the masses, and therefore the people feel very much connected to the movie. They feel it is their story that is being screened and it had great deal of appeal. And it was a kind of, this montage technique was something that he had developed. Montage, I hope you remember the etymology. It comes from montere, to assemble or to put together. And the kind of shock stimuli which Eisenstein believed that these disparate shots being put together would have, can be seen in this movie too. There is a very famous scene towards the end of the movie where you have the slaughtering of the people, the massacre of the strikers. They are all just massacred, and it is intercut with scenes of an abattoir. Abattoir is where cattle is slaughtered, and you have these gruesome, disturbing scenes like the one that I have put up there on the slide. So these are put in quick succession in a way that this massacre of the factory workers shocked the people in the desired way. And it was an immediate success, and soon after this, he was commissioned to direct a film that celebrated the 20th anniversary of the failed 1905 revolution against the Tsar's army. So that revolution was what the next film was based upon, the one that we have to study, Battleship Potemkin. The Russian name is also indicated there, made in the year 1925, one of the most important and influential films ever made. And when the commission was given to Eisenstein to make the movie, his original intention was, of course, to cover the entire event, the entire revolution that was spread across a large region. But finally, he decided that to get a very powerful impact, he could probably set the action in one of the sites of the revolution, and that is why he chose to tell the story of the battleship Potemkin. The movie then focused on this single act or chapter of this 1905 revolution, the massacre of the sailors, and then more importantly the citizens in the port of Odessa. We will talk about that. And this movie was also, needless to say, a big hit. Someone is trying to enter again. Then he, in about 2 or 3 years' time, he was commissioned to make another movie. This project was called October, based on the October Revolution, 10 days that shook the world. That was the, this was basically on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. He was commissioned to make this movie, and it was released in 1928. He was given every kind of encouragement by the government, the Soviet Army, Navy, all of these were placed at the director's disposal for him to make the movie. And he wrote the script based on a voluminous documentary material from the era, and on especially this book by John Reed, the book called 10 Days That Shook the World. And finally, when the film was completed in 1927, it had something like a duration of about 4 hours. It was too long. But in the meantime, something had happened to disturb the fame and the position that Eisenstein enjoyed till then. Because during the making of this movie, he had used a lot of material with Trotsky. After Lenin, you have Trotsky, Leon Trotsky in this. But then here was Stalin, who came to power by that time, and Stalin's group ensured that the scenes involving Leon Trotsky were all cut off, and ultimately the film became a much shorter one. But it was not just that. Stalin had his own apprehensions about the kind of position that was taken by Eisenstein, and he is Diya Biju one of our, and nobody in our class is trying to make that, using that account, right? Yeah. Okay, so the references to the exiled Trotsky in this movie kind of filled Stalin with apprehension, and very soon you find Eisenstein falling out of favor. So he had used October as a laboratory for experimenting with intellectual and ideological montage, that is more than the images. Here was Eisenstein, who was using, who had graduated to the next step of montage, and he was trying to use intellectual or ideological montage, where, beyond the images you can try to think of the concept being presented. An abstract type of editing in which the relationships established between shots are conceptual rather than visual or emotional. So beyond the visual, beyond the emotional, you have the conceptual montage. It was, of course, a tall order. You could not expect. Eisenstein had by this time perfected the technique, and he expected the common man to be able to comprehend what he tried to convey. You can imagine, a buddhijeevi film, it became a very intellectual kind of film, and this again was something that did not make Stalin too happy. People thought that he was being too elitist, that Eisenstein was being this kind of formalist excess, giving too much of importance to this kind of aestheticism was a very elitist step, and he actually, the next movie that Eisenstein made, Old and New, was again one which was rejected, largely rejected because of this, and he hated Stalin. Actually, as I told you, did not like Eisenstein for various reasons. Number one, he was a Jew. Number two, he thought he was an intellectual, and number three, he thought that he did not support Stalin and that he had greater regard for some of the earlier leaders. And he, how did he ensure that Eisenstein would not flourish as a filmmaker? Naturally, by reducing the state subsidy apparatus. So naturally, Eisenstein could not go forward. He had to pack up all his projects, and he could not complete many other films. He moved to the United States, but there he was not much of a success. He came back to the to Russia years later. In 1938, he made this film, Alexander Nevsky, and that was all. So we'll just mention the others, Potemkin and Vertov and Dovzhenko. These were some of the other filmmakers who excelled during that time. But I think we will focus all our attention on Eisenstein. The kind of approach to filmmaking that was provided by Stalin's regime was not a very encouraging one. So there was this Stalin's supporters, created something called, they removed that state film trust, which was called Sovkino, from the jurisdiction of the Commissionerate of Education and placed it directly under the authority of the Supreme Council of the National Economy. It was reorganized as Soyuzkino, and it was a trust that dictated that individual creativity be subordinated to the political aims of the party and the state. So they were dictating terms and expressing a great deal of disapproval with the creativity that Eisenstein was exhibiting. Not just Eisenstein, but the other filmmakers too. And they kept saying, this is what you should convey. The government wants you to say this, to project this, and so on. So naturally, they were tampering with the individual creativity of the filmmakers, and in no time at all, Soviet films went into a kind of decline. And it was only much later that it revived itself from that state of decline. But before that decline, you have this very important contribution made by Eisenstein, a person who has influenced generations of filmmakers. Even today, films are made which in various ways pay homage to movies like Battleship, Potemkin. As I told you, there are some significant immortal shots and scenes in the Battleship Potemkin and some of his other movies. Particular mention may be made of the Odessa Steps sequence in this movie. Those of you who have watched the movie would have seen that sequence, one of the most important sequences ever filmed, and this is something which time and again you can see in various other movies in the form of a kind of homage to Battleship Potemkin. Various shots which remind us of, it's a kind of reckoning of those scenes from Battleship Potemkin. I'll just quote the words of the critic Derek Malcolm, who said, "There is no art without conflict," Eisenstein once wrote, and Battleship Potemkin was a classic example of a film that attempted to become a banner for revolution, made with the utmost rigor and almost mathematically conceived piece by piece. This story of the abortive 1905 revolution in Russia still manages to be extraordinarily spontaneous in its effect. If the actual text is often propagandist, it was obviously made for propaganda to convey the importance of revolution, but he took it beyond that level of propaganda by choosing the technique of editing and doing it in almost a poetic manner. The editing and building of pace and tension circumvents that. So much beyond the propaganda, there is a great deal that this film has. And he instructs us, study the famous Odessa step sequence and you will see what editing is really about. Here you have a kind of benchmark that was set up by Eisenstein. Everything that came after that was often and is often measured in terms of that. Adinathratholam ettuvo. Does it reach up to Eisenstein's editing technique? But although the film has been studied by countless students rather than enjoyed, I can therefore relate to the fact that you did not enjoy the movie. It has to be studied. Idila are technical aspects namalku kore padikkanundu. It remains a masterwork that has seldom, if ever, been bettered. And it's not just a primer. It's not just one of the early movies. It is a textbook case. It's like going back to the plays of, let us say, Shakespeare or Chaucer. We may not often enjoy them, but the significant position that they have is something that cannot be denied. Like the later movie Citizen Kane, Orson Welles' Hollywood movie Citizen Kane, or Orson Welles' movie, it uses everything that the cinema then had to offer. It was a big production. Whatever was available then was fully utilized and it created a new language. And even though it was made in 1925, it is still relevant today. So this is the what shall you say, the credits, the director, the name of the producer, employed by the government of course, who wrote the story. Eisenstein was involved in the writing of the story as well. It was shot in Goskino. Tissé was the cinematographer. The music was provided by Maisel. Music also plays a very important role in the movie. And even though, as I told you, you do not have one single actor playing the role of the protagonist, you have largely the crowd scenes, the mob or the crowd or the people. They are the important actors, but there are a few situations in which characters like Vekulinchuk and the commander Golikov and the chief officer Gilyarovsky come into prominence. So those three actors are mentioned. It is interesting to note that Eisenstein himself had performed a small role in this movie. We'll see that in one of the slides. So the movie is made up of 5 sections. It's called 5 movements or 5 acts. You can compare it to the classical drama made up of the 5 acts, the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action and the denouement. It is more or less in the same way that the movie has been structured. These are the 5 sections: Men and Maggots, Drama on the Quarterdeck, Appeal from the Dead, the Odessa Steps and Meeting the Squadron. I've just explained in brief what these sections convey. We'll look at them in detail now. If you have watched the movie, you would be able to do better justice to this discussion. So these 5 parts are clearly indicated in the title cards that are used. And in the first section, Men and Maggots, we see how the action is set in the ship called Potemkin. It was a battleship. And there you have the sailors being treated almost like vermin, insignificant people. And that is seen in the way they are fed meat that has become rotten. You know, the sailors feel very uncomfortable with the kind of treatment that they are given, and it reaches a peak with them discovering maggots, you know, worm-eaten meat that is being served to them. That shot, you know, of the worms being discovered in the meat is again an immortal, you know, it is something that shocked the people. They had not really seen this kind of image on the screen. So you have this film opening between these shots of the waves, the violently breaking waves, and then you have a line from Lenin which says, "Revolution is war. Of all the wars known in history, it is the only lawful, rightful, just and truly great war, that is revolution." In Russia, this war has been declared and begun, and this was Lenin's statement about the 1905 revolution. Okay. Yeah, so these are some of the shots of that section, the men and the maggots, the sailors getting together and discussing the inhuman treatment that is meted out to them, and that very shocking scene of the maggots being discovered in the meat. Now when they, this is what goes into the making of the soup that is given to them. When they raise this complaint, it is quickly brushed aside by the ship's officers. The ship's officers are, you know, owe their allegiance to the Tsar, and they say, "You are simply creating trouble, just obey our orders and eat what is given to you. Once these worms are wiped away, the meat is as good as new, and you better be satisfied with that." But they do not. They do not heed, the sailors do not heed. So you have an officer who is spying upon the sailors, listening to, eavesdropping to listen to what they are discussing and so on. And he, in that, he lashes one of the sailors on the back during one of those routine checkups. And in between you have these title cards that convey the dialogue. And along with telling us the dialogue, it also acts as a very powerful didactic. It has a didactic purpose too, and that is when you have this man Vakulinchik, who's one of the sailors, who says, "Enough is enough, and what are we waiting for? All of Russia has risen, and it is time that we rose in action too against these officers." And when the complaints are dismissed by the officers and the ship's doctor, the sailors refuse to eat this soup. And and then you have the scenes of the sailors doing a lot of manual labor. They have to do the washing up and so on. And this is again seen in a montage sequence. And you can see the anger of one of the sailors who finds a line like from the prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread." There are people who have been denied their daily bread, and in his frustration and anger, he just smashes that plate. So that the feeling of rebellion that is welling up in the minds of the sailors is conveyed adequately in that, and it reaches a peak in the next section, drama on the deck. They are, the people who refuse to have the soup are now considered as rebels, and all of them are made to assemble on the deck of the ship, and you have one particularly rebellious group. Ettom adhigam bahalam vecha a group of people moved to one side of the ship, and then you have this huge tarpaulin which is put on them so that they would be shot at. And who will shoot them? They're asking the sailors, the fellow sailors, to shoot at their own companions. Adinana tarpaulin ittadu, and just shoot at them. This is the order that is given to them. And of course the sailors just cannot bring themselves to shoot at their own colleagues. You have the ship's priest now, who comes in, and who with his cross he conveys this idea that this is to be done, that these people have no right to protest and they have to obey. If they do not obey, this is what awaits them. Firing squad is what awaits them. And that priest is Eisenstein. He's the one who enacts the role of the priest. And then the sailors, you have Vakulanchik asking, whom are you fighting against? Will you kill your own brethren? There is no way they do that. And then the sailors now begin to attack the officers. Many of the officers are killed, they are thrown overboard. The priest is also thrown overboard. But in between that scuffle, you have, sadly, Vakulanchik is also shot and killed. So this is the scene where you have the mutinous sailors over whom the tarpaulin has been kept, and then you have the sailors being asked to fire at them. They refuse, they attack the officers. This is the priest, role played by Eisenstein. This is Vakulanchik, and then sadly he is also dead. And in a scene, where you have, he is suspended on that rope over the water in exactly the same way that meat was hung in the ship's kitchen. You move to the third section where, bearing the dead body of Vakulanchik, the ship now moves towards Odessa. Odessa enna sthalam. It reaches Odessa. Odessa, I think today it is in Ukraine. At that point of time, it was a very important port, and there the people of Odessa have all heard about, news has spread to the land about the rebellion of the sailors, and they are all eagerly awaiting the arrival of the ship at the port of Odessa to give them a hero's welcome and to pay respect to the body of the leader of that rebellion, Vakulanchik. And that is why the section is called A Dead Man Calls for Justice. ഈ Vakulanchikന്റെ ബോഡിയുടെ മേലെ ഇതാണ് എഴുതിയിരിക്കുന്നത്. And it was said he died for a bowl, for a spoon of soup. Dead for a spoonful of soup. He became a martyr for a spoonful of soup. And you have the crowd, some of the most beautiful scenes of the movie can be seen in the way the people come from all over Odessa towards the port and towards the ship and move around the body of Vakulanchik. And they have now come with food. They know that these people, the sailors, avarku bhakshanam illadeyanu avare rebel cheythathu ennu ariyam. Therefore they have come with food for the people, the sailors. But this is something that has been overheard by the Tsar's army. Anganeyana, you have the Cossacks of the Tsar's army being brought in now to attack not just the ship, but more than that, the people, the ordinary citizens of Odessa who came to support the sailors. And in a very brutal scene, this is the best known sequence of Eisenstein's career, the epitome of the montage technique. Odessa, the whole town, the people of the town come to see the sailors off with baskets of fruit. They wave at them, and then you have them expressing their solidarity. But then you have all kinds of people who have, one man who has lost his legs. He has also struggled and come towards the scene to express his solidarity. There is a woman who is pushing a child in a pram. There is so many people, ordinary people. And then suddenly you can see the close-up of a woman whose face is shrieking because she has noticed the arrival of the Cossacks. So these are the people now in disarray. They run, and in a very significant move, the precise, very strict move of the armament that is shot in the way in the straight line, these people move down, and then the child in the pram. It's one of the most tension-filled scenes in the movie, the way the mother loses control over the pram and the pram just rattles down with the baby in it. A woman whose child is trampled to death. Kutti avade steppil veenu, and in that hustle and bustle, he is trampled to death. The mother holding the child's body, and then the soldiers taking aim. This is the woman. ഈ ഒരു scene ആയിരുന്നു ആദ്യം കണ്ണട ഇട്ടിട്ട് കാണിച്ചു, and now the spectacles are shattered. You must watch this sequence. മുഴുവൻ മൂവി കണ്ടിട്ടില്ലെങ്കിലും അത് കാണണം. ഒഡെസ സീക്വൻസ് എന്തായാലും നിങ്ങൾ കാണണം. I'll complete wind up with the last section. So this is about the Odessa sequence. You know, much has been spoken about it, about the way it is often referred to in many other movies. The stairway extending some 142 meters, constructed in 1841. Today it's known as the Potemkin stairs. It's the main entrance to the city of Odessa. The child shot in the back, the mother grieving, the people being trampled underfoot, the soldiers steadily descending, you know, in a very, very mechanical manner. They have no human emotions at all. That is what is conveyed in the way they move, almost in a machine-like manner. And then the mounted Cossacks arrive with guns at the bottom of the stairway. They continue the assault, and finally the pram teeters down the stairs, and as it is about to tumble, the sequence ends with the famous shot of the nurse, open-mouthed, bloody, with broken glasses. And these images have been echoed and, you know, reflected again and again in so many movies. And the last section is what is called meeting the squadron, or sometimes it is also called one against all. It is, you know, after the many other ships, you know, they come now, and you have them taking aim at the battleship. But then what miraculously happens is the fact that the ships, the sailors in those ships, who are also the common people, feel that they should never harm the sailors of Battleship Potemkin, and that it should not be shot at. And so in that, again, a brilliant sequence. You have all the, it's a flotilla, many, many ships surrounding it, but not a single shot being fired. And Odessa, Battleship Potemkin, sailing safely through the midst. In fact, in a very cinematic technique, it just enters the camera. The last shot of the movie is the ship entering it and moving towards eternity or immortality in the namalku manasilakkam. Many people feel that after the climactic Odessa step sequence, this is a kind of anticlimax. That is precisely what it was intended as. Meeting the squadron, or one against all. And after the events of Odessa, the whole squadron is sent to destroy the rebellious battleship, but the crew, they decide to face the fight, and approaches the enemy ships. It sends a signal to the squadron sailors, calling them on joining the revolt. It is a very important scene where you have the red flag of rebellion being hoisted. Red, you know, ഈ ഒരു black and white film എങ്ങനെ red കിട്ടും? That is again an important technique. They used a white flag. White ആ സമയത്ത് ഉപയോഗിക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ല, because white was the flag of the Tsar's army. But for cinematic purposes, they had to use the white flag, because black flag use ചെയ്താൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ red flag use ചെയ്താൽ എങ്ങനെയാവും? It would become a black ആയിട്ടല്ലേ black and white film കാണുള്ളൂ. അത് red ആയി കാണിക്കണമെങ്കിൽ white flag use ചെയ്തിട്ട് finally ഈ film produce ചെയ്യുന്ന post production scene they colored the white flag. ആ ഫിലിമിൻ്റെ ഓരോ celluloid ബിറ്റിലും red pen വെച്ചിട്ട് അത് red color ചെയ്തിട്ടാണ് finally you get that scene. ആ ഒരു ഷോട്ട് ഞാൻ ഇതിൽ ഇട്ടിട്ടില്ല. In the next class I'll show that as well. And you have these other battleships. You know, the word brothers, ഒരു slide ആയിട്ട് വരികയാണ്, ഒരു title card ആയിട്ട്. It appears on the screen, and everyone feels solidarity with the people, the sailors of Battleship. The guns remain silent, and you just have hooray that is flying over the heads of the Tsar's admirals. The battleship goes through the squadron without a single shot. And in the final scene, you have the battleship going right into the camera as a symbol of a new era. A rebellion has created a new era. That is the message that is conveyed. We'll stop there for the moment and continue in the next class.